Well, I'm Ulrich Kortz. I'm a German citizen. Nevertheless, I have some internationality. I did a PhD in the US and was a postdoc in Italy and then in France, and started my independent academic career in Lebanon at the American University of Beirut, where I stayed for 5 years before coming to Jacobs University in 2002. I am an inorganic chemist, and research-wise, my interests are in the area of the synthesis of novel functional materials. Besides determining the structure of these compounds, we are also interested in the composition and mainly also their properties, which range from catalytic properties to biomedical activity to electronic, magnetic, optical and electrochemical properties, for example. So we make compounds of the type that you can see here. I brought some models. We use single crystal X-ray diffraction a lot to determine the structure of these compounds, and they have a very broad spectrum of properties and hence associated possible applications even in real life. We collaborate with academic partners. We also collaborate with the chemical industry quite extensively in the area of catalysis. So we have a strong research activity here where we also involve undergraduate students as early as in their first year. And we have also produced, ever since I joined here, more than 30 publications where undergraduates are co-authors. That means they get real research exposure, where we have them in the lab working with now PhD students or postdocs. At the beginning, they come maybe once or twice a week for 2 to 3 hours. Later on, that could be 2 to 3 times or more per week, depending on their schedule. They will become more and more independent after an initial training. It depends on the individual, on the interest and the focus and the motivation. Certainly in the third year, which culminates with the PhD, the bachelor thesis, they have to come to the lab more frequently to produce results, to write up their work, and then produce a good quality bachelor thesis, which ideally should have enough information to produce one research paper. We manage to do this often, there are also examples where undergraduate students, generate 2 publications out of their research work. A typical day for a bachelor student coming to the lab would be, of course, that they put on a lab coat and goggles, keeping safety measures in mind. Nowadays, we also need perhaps still a COVID face mask. Then a plan is made with the supervisor what perhaps precursor compound initially is to be synthesized according to the literature. So they would start at the very beginning, reproducing certain published compounds. Before then we introduce them to the actual novel research idea that we have developed, where they then, after a few months, perhaps start with some initial experiments, always closely supervised by then the PhD student or postdoc. And after about half a year or so, it could well be that the undergraduate student gets even access maybe to the lab with the transponder, and then can do the reaction more or less alone, but never totally alone in the lab. Of course, we have of course always co-workers around to avoid that people work alone in case something happens. Over the 2 to 3 years, an undergraduate can go from basically being somebody who just brings chemicals to the bench all the way to somebody who really understands the research project, who has real results, gets thereby more and more excited, of course, with positive results. The motivation is further increased, and they become quite often quite passionate about research. Sometimes I need to even tell them to not forget their academic duties, because they spend perhaps at times too much time in our research lab. but they're exposed to instruments. They initially use simple instrumentation like a UV visible spectrometer or an infrared spectrometer, but later they would accompany maybe the lab supervisor doing NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy experiments, or even watch the single crystal X-ray diffractometer being used. And so they can really learn a lot during this time. Often students then realize that actual research is real fun. Some of them then decide perhaps to look more into this, maybe to do a master or PhD research focused degrees. So often the students really enjoy this. And if not, they can pick another research group, and if experimental research is not for them, they might join a colleague of mine who is doing theoretical work. Then they would be mainly in front of the computer rather than being in the research laboratory. So we have a lot to offer here, and undergrads are welcome. I often introduce in already my first semester general and inorganic chemistry lecture that we have an ongoing research activity, and it happens almost every year that already in the first semester, after I have shown, about 10 students or so usually come to see the lab, and maybe out of these, 1 or 2 already want to start working in the lab. And then maybe in the second or third semester, another 1 or 2 will join. So we at times reach even the limit of what, in terms of the number of students that we can supervise, because it is a big responsibility, of course, for every student, bachelor student. There needs to be a proper supervisor, and these people themselves should be a little bit senior to have their own research projects under control before then they are able to supervise undergraduates. So but in principle, it's very easy for undergraduates to enter our research lab. They basically should just contact me or follow up my suggestions in the lecture. And of course, I keep an eye a little bit on how their performance was in the exam, my exam in my general chemistry course, also the lab performance, the teaching lab performance. And if I see that there is talent, then in particular I'm interested in these people, because it's more likely that they can, let's say, have this lab activity besides their core academic duties without really sacrificing there too much. If any interested student wants to contact me, this of course can happen, as I mentioned before, after a lecture or by simply sending me an email. Also, I can be found on the Jacobs webpage by just typing my last name. You can reach eventually our homepage, which is quite extensive and gives a lot of information about the research we do, about the publications, about lectures that I have given out there in the world. Based on this, students can then send me an email and we schedule an appointment. And then they can come to my office and not only see these beautiful models here in the video, but actually touch them and perhaps start to get excited about this research field. We can also then go to the lab and have a lab tour. Also, I invite undergraduate students who are interested to our weekly research group meetings, where they can then participate in order to see the composition of my research group, who are the people, and quickly become a member of a team, where we also sometimes have some research group outings. We go to some restaurant, or we go to the German bowling, the Kegeln, which we did recently, or go to the Freimarkt or so. So these undergrads would then become members of the research group and would participate in all activities actually.